Usually there's an option to make co-host.
Yeah, I'm a co-host now.
Oh, you're a co-host. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you able to share screen? Yeah.
And we're recording as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, beautiful.
Okay.
All right. So I will start before I'm gonna jump in to the green state vision. I'm gonna share the context, which is very important, why we have arrived to the point of the green state vision for everybody to understand. If you have questions, please write them down, and then we're gonna I'm gonna try to answer them after that, after I finish the presentation. So this is for the context, why it is important we've launched it and why we were at COP26. So this is the context once again. Something about me. So I'm Raki Ap. I'm the younger son of the assassinated anthropologist Arnold Ap. We fled much later to the Netherlands. So I was born in a refugee camp right across the border in Papua New Guinea. And 4 months after my father Arnold Ap was assassinated, so we fled to the Netherlands. I grew up there as a Dutch citizen, and I joined the army on the age of 21 because at that age I thought that was the way to contribute to peace and justice. However, now I know that behind this military institution there are some, disturbing political dynamics. So it transformed me to the person I become today, which is a storyteller, using West Papua's example of hope, political activist, human rights activist, and in recent years, indigenous climate activist as well. And my role as international spokesperson for Free West Papua campaign, I try to educate the world, especially those in the Netherlands, about what is happening there. So, of course, most of you know that West Papua was a former Dutch colony, and I used this slide last week when I gave a guest lecture at the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands, which is the Green Hub, so-called green hub in the world, where they educate people about biodiversity, ecosystem restoration. And I said why I start these pictures, because you here in Wageningen must understand the role of colonization within the climate crisis context. So I asked the students how much of them knew which flag this one was, because they obviously recognized this one was the Dutch flag, but they didn't recognize this one. I said, so just imagine you are future policymakers regarding biodiversity and so on. You are the best educated, kids in the Netherlands, and yet you don't know that this flag belongs to your history, part of your history. And that's a problematic position, because you must understand that this flag represents the western half of the world's largest tropical island. And I will zoom into that later. And I told them, do you put a link between colonialism, capitalism, racism, and the climate crisis? And, a lot of them said, no, I can't make that link. I said, that's interesting. And I'm going to jump into that later, because this is the general line of the so-called indigenous perspective on climate change. The UN scientists have shown that just 5% of world's population exists of indigenous peoples, and their way of life have preserved more than 80% of world's remaining biodiversity. That's a fundamental number. Because at the same time, these UN scientists have shown that 96% of all deforestation in the world because of soya, mining, fossil fuel activities, happens on the same indigenous lands. So those who wanted to prevent a further climate crisis must look at these two numbers, because indigenous peoples have preserving 80% of world's remaining biodiversity. At the same time, all the deforestation happens mostly on indigenous land. So the most obvious climate solution would be protecting indigenous rights. So the forest will stay intact and we got less carbon emissions. It's basically that simple. But it's still shocking the world. And why is West Papua and the Green State Vision getting interested? Is important because this is what nature.com describe about the island of New Guinea. It's the world's largest tropical island, housing one of the most richest island flora in the world regarding land and marine biodiversity. So it's a so-called frontline hotspot for those who wanted to, prevent a further climate and biodiversity crisis. Having that said, we go to the context about what is happening on the island, at least the western half of the island. We know it's colonized after the Netherlands. It's been handed over to Indonesia before the Netherlands promised and prepared the West Papuans towards, the right to self-determination. But we know it didn't happen because a year later, in 1962, the Netherlands and Indonesia signed an agreement, the so-called New York Agreement, without the consultation of the indigenous West Papuans. And a year later, Indonesia invaded West Papua. We got a fake referendum, and in 2021, the West Papuans are being threatened with a genocide and ecocide. So, and these are, historical pictures showing the historic band between the Netherlands and West Papua. I, as a military servant in the Netherlands, I can say that there is not another flag than the Netherlands has been hoisted on any single submarine or marine ship or flag, but it happened with West Papua. So this is what I tell the Dutch. Why is this chapter wiped out of the Dutch history books? Because they don't want them to know what is happening there. 500,000 West Papuan killed, for media banned, world largest gold mine, and so on and so on. So this is what the big environmental organizations' narrative is around the world regarding biodiversity and ecosystem, right? If you look at the campaigns of Greenpeace in Indonesia, it's focused on, stop, save the orangutans. Yes, we care about the orangutans, we care about the forest, but what about the 500,000 indigenous West Papuans killed? Are we less worth than animals? And this is what the indigenous perspective is underlining. So it's about Black Lives Matter. This is why we connected with Black Lives Matter movement, and the hashtag Papuan Lives Matters was live. This is like the slogan of Greenpeace in the past. If we wanted to save orangutans from extinction, we need to save their homes. Well, this is the slogan from indigenous people's point of view, which is saying if we cared about indigenous life and protected and campaigned for their rights, the orangutans and the trees were still there. It's that simple, but it's that fundamental. It's been underlined by the UN scientists itself that how the remaining 80% of the world's biodiversity are based on indigenous land. So this is a report, an article of Wageningen University with the title Deforestation in the World's Largest Tropical Island. What does future hold? Yeah, what does it hold when environmental organizations and green institutions are educating the wrong narrative about plants and animals and not focusing on human rights? The people who are living there and who are screaming for more than decades about what is happening there. So this is what the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs is saying, ensuring the collective rights of indigenous peoples to land, territories, and resources, not only for their well-being, but also for addressing some of the most pressing global challenges, such as the climate change and environmental degradation. So now we're getting closer to why this Green State vision is so important and is playing into what the UN is saying, what the UN scientists are saying, that indigenous peoples play an important role, but they don't know where to start. So we think for them. And this is what they have to reflect on, from the 4.6 billion years of life to just less than 10 years to prevent irreversible destruction of Earth's crucial ecosystem. What does innovation and development means if you reflect these, huge numbers? And so what you see in West Papua is regarding indigenous perspective on climate change, a clear showcase where, the climate crisis and the Black Lives Matters coming together with, unfinished decolonization, colonialism clearly happening there by Indonesia, capitalism, the greed, corporations such as the world's largest gold mine and BP and palm oil companies destroying our, human lives of the indigenous people of West Papua, our culture, and then, the entire environment. And both of these two could happen because there is racism, because if they care about their lives, this wouldn't happen. So these are the root causes why this unique frontline environment, frontline, forest or ecosystem could be destroyed, with as result the climate crisis as we see it today. This is what I described as the so-called climate racism. So problem and challenges have been named. Are there solutions, pathways for change? If so, what does this look like? Yes, educating environmental organizations and green institutions about what is happening on the front line. And we use West Papua as clear showcase. That's what we have done in the Netherlands, but also in the UK and around the world with those who wanted to hear. Because corporations such as BP and Freeport-McMoRan are working together as well across borders with immense, a lot of lobbyists supporting, Australian government to keep it, a secret what is happening there for the last 60 years. So we have to collaborate. So we work with all kinds of grassroots movements such as Extinction Rebellion. And in the Netherlands, we got the entire, Netherlands climate movement behind our cause because we hooked in to the climate narrative, climate change crisis. And in the UK, we can see the same. Now, talking with Greenpeace Netherlands, friends, young friends of the Earth Europe, about West Papua, what is happening, and tell them about the genocide. We got more momentum, and we've showed them that West Papuans are capable of organizing themselves, and especially with the ULMWP, now more than 80 countries demanding a United Nations human rights mission to West Papua. So we were in Glasgow because the Green State Vision. So I'm just finishing the presentation, why this Green State Vision is so relevant. We have seen the importance that indigenous peoples have played. We have seen the reports of UN scientists underlining the importance that indigenous peoples have played. We've seen the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs saying that indigenous peoples are the most important stakeholders to prevent the further climate crisis. But at the same time, in Glasgow, we saw an inactive, global leadership once again not finding the courage to find the right solution. So that's why we were there, because we have that solution. And we are the world's largest tropical island, housing the second/third largest rainforest, which is, one of Earth's biggest lungs. And in Indonesia, it's not in good hands. So the Green State Vision is a vehicle to get their independence. And at the same time, us having our independence would be a solution for the world to prevent the further destruction of such a frontline area. We can help our brothers and sisters in the Pacific, but the first thing is to save our people so we can save this world's largest tropical island. So this is what we built momentum in Glasgow. I stood on stage with the famous Greta Thunberg on the stage, and I got some interviews with CNN and other, journalists, and we got some interesting articles launched or published regarding the Green State Vision. And this is what the director of the Global Justice said about the Green State Vision on this magazine, Ecologist, said that the ULMWP had created a more compelling vision of how to deal with climate change than anyone from the world's wealthiest countries gathered at COP26. This says a lot. So yes, we are victims by this greed corporations and colonial countries, but at the same time, we are climate leaders because we are leading the way out of the climate crisis, offering them help by giving us control of what belongs for us for more than thousands of years. And so we collaborate and network with a lot of movements and peoples to, pitch our Green State Vision and why this can be a way out for all of them. But they just have to find the courage to work together with us and promote the right to self-determination. All right, so that's the context regarding the climate, the Green State Vision. And if there are any questions regarding that before I'm gonna jump in the general line of the Green State Vision. It's a lot, I know. Any questions so far, or you want me to just continue with the red line of the Green State Vision?
Yeah, maybe just keep going, and then we can see if there's any other questions.
Yeah, perfect. So the Green State Vision have been made by Solon Law, which is a law firm in the UK, and with the help of the international lawyers for West Papua, and they are specialized in, in international law and forming constitutions for countries. So they reach out to the ULMWP, the executives and interim president Wenda, and they said, we want to help you to, build up this vision. So that's what they did. So they just gathered all the information regarding how the indigenous West Papuans have lived for thousands of years, on customary values and norms. And they basically put that on paper so it is understandable for academics and global institutions. Because, indigenous West Papuans don't know words like ecosystem restoration or biodiversity. They are part of that environment. That's what they do. They live in equality with all beings, and they have just put those way of lives and norms and values on the paper. So, here in the Netherlands, for example, they've said, this is what biodiversity is. We have to reduce plastic and so forth and so forth. In the Green State Vision, we've outlined the importance of indigenous knowledge, of indigenous wisdom. That's how we have lived in peace for more than 40,000 years. And that's why the island is still green. It's not about, using solar panels. So we've just underlined the importance of, cultural values and how we must protect this tribal democracy, how they have managed the island and the way they, collaborate or they make decisions. So that's how we have, kind of formed the three pillars within this Green State Vision. So first is, how are we going to protect the balance between nature and social behavior, and then we got customary ownership, guardianship, and then the democratic structure. So it's like a three-step which have been outlined in the Green State Vision. And then, so those are like the foundation that yes, all beings are equal, and indigenous knowledge is leading. And when we want to innovate in the future, it's about customary guardianship and leadership as well. So we're gonna bring them together, and they're gonna tell us what they, allow us to do on the lands. So we go back to the basics and ask tribes who lived there for thousands of years if we can do something, a project in the future, and if so, what would it stop? So we're gonna facilitate them, making them understandable what we are willing to do on a specific area in their province or area. And I think you can scale that up. So we're gonna build a democratic and legislative infrastructure, conform international standards, but once again, facilitating all tribes so they can understand what is happening. So we can't decide without their support. That is basically the general line within the Green State Vision. And in this way, we can uphold the traditional values, the traditional way of democracy, and at the same time building a nation with the innovation we want for future planning. Yeah, I think I will stop there, and then if there are any questions, I can go into depth and answer if I have the answers with me. Thank you.
We've got a question here from the audience downstairs. What's the international response been to the declaration of the Green State?
So yeah, to be honest, there are few official replies from governments or heads of states, obviously, because all of them are mostly friends of Indonesia. But yes, we got some support from, of course, Vanuatu, who was really supportive in this as usual, but also as single nation so far. So yeah, we're hoping that the Pacific Island leaders will understand the importance of this Green State Vision. It's in their interest because their islands are sinking as we speak. And if you look at the numbers of the UN scientists, that they're basically saying, yes, we have to reduce carbon emission, to accelerate global heating. At the same time, we need every tree to capture this carbon. So knowing that West Papua is the world's largest tropical island, the island of New Guinea, housing the second/third largest rainforest, it is in their interest of the Pacific Island states to protect every tree over there. So I would encourage them to welcome the Green State vision and to help us to promote it globally. That would be my answer.
You mentioned Greenpeace before as as an organisation that hasn't necessarily been a great ally. Do you think there's a possibility with this Green State for more green support than in terms of internationally, or is there a particular reason why, especially with Freeport, that there hasn't been more global support from green organisations?
Yeah, and that's really problematic. And that's what we are doing here with the so-called indigenous perspective on climate change. Is we are bringing in a new perspective, which is not about plants and animals, but which is focusing on the frontline defenders, which is indigenous people such as West Papua, the West Papuans. And we are like, sometimes we have a kind of friction or conflict of interest, and if that's the case, that's the case. But they cannot point on the politicians to act, and at the same time they're looking away from their responsibility. How are you going to campaign about biodiversity without the most important stakeholders, which are the first line defenders on that certain area? So it's about their credibility, which is at stake as well. So now a lot of indigenous peoples around the world are demanding their seat on the table at this environment organization. So and time is running out. So everything is politics. And what my experience is that environment organizations always are afraid when it comes to politics. But now time is running out, and we are heading towards the biggest crisis in mankind. What position are you going to take? So it's their credibility. So all we have to do is confronting them with UN scientists' numbers themselves. So they cannot look away, and they must facilitate us. That's the only way, and we can solve things out. So I hope they will, come to sense and do the right thing.
So we've got a question here. I don't know if you can see, from Jeanette. Practically, how is the best way to approach environmental groups we belong to and engage them in West Papua and the Green Vision?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a daily, activity of me. So we are constantly in a modus of cooperation, because that's where the potential lies. But they are in a power position, not we. They have funds, they have a network, they have employees. We don't have that. So they must take the step and to understand that there won't be a climate solution, if you don't work with indigenous peoples. That's what the scientists are saying. That's what the numbers are saying. So what we have to do is we must educate. And what we see is that the top of these environment organizations are mostly living, decades back. So, but a lot of young employees are understanding this narrative. If you look at COP26, we see these youngsters and activists who are on the saying, no, we must listen and facilitate indigenous peoples. They're the ones who have preserved all this ecosystem. They're the ones who give us 10 years time. So yes, please bring them to the center of the decision-making process. And we use them as vehicle to shook this entire green institutions coming to our way. That's to be honest, that's the reality. And I would love to see that they will take the decision and see it for themselves. Say, guys, come on, how can we help you? But it's not, the opposite is happening. So the way forward is to find allies within institutions, employees who want to be our voice, and who can be a momentum within such an institution itself. And together, we're gonna shift these narratives and the stories and the campaigns. And by changing this, the system will change as well. That's the strategy.
Where is the best place online for people to read more about the Green State?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have a website where you can find all the information, all the news, and also the summary of the Green State Vision, which is www.greenstatevision.info. So www.greenstatevision.info.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Just while everyone thinks about a question. It's not really a question, but just seeing the bird of paradise behind you just reminds me. I was born in Papua New Guinea, and I'm connected up in the highlands in Goroka, and yeah, we have the Ragiana bird of paradise up there. So, and it's similar maybe in New Guinea, is that Papua New Guinea is that there's all of these beautiful opportunities for ecotourism, but no one comes. So I imagine it's similar in West Papua, that there would be amazing opportunities for ecotourism there.
The African Union.
Yeah, we are willing to be the world's eco hotspot, and they can, see and experience how the people are living in balance with nature and with our beings, and that we can build a society next to that, respecting all this way of life, and that this is the future, and that it can be combined. That's our dream. We are willing to build that.
Robert, you said you've got a question there. Can we hear you, or do you want to type it?
The eco states. President of the DRC. That's conference.
Robert, do you have a question?
To help develop.
Oh, you're typing.
Eco state in Congo. Needing for the British government and American. So anyway, this exactly that.
Can you see the question, Matthew?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just having a read. Yeah. So thanks for the question, Robert. So we didn't had this is one of the challenges. We didn't had an official accreditation for the so-called green and blue zone, where the official event of COP26. So we were on the fringes of the event, and it's really problematic that Indonesia was in there, so-called representative of the western half of the world's largest tropical island, obviously West Papua, but they were crying when the world were pledging for ending deforestation by 2030, and Indonesian Minister of Environment was like, no, it's unfair. And so yeah, we know why it's unfair, because you are destroying all the forest with palm oil companies and mining activities. So us, was the official representatives of the indigenous peoples of, but the ULMWP was not accredited for the forum, so we couldn't met indigenous or African leaders such as the Democratic Republic of Congo or other ones. We also didn't had a opportunity to join the delegation of any Pacific Island nations. So we have a lot of work to do, and especially the Pacific Island nations, I would encourage them to realize what kind of power position they could play with West Papua. West Papua is in their interest. It's about their future. The longer they are quiet about what is happening in West Papua, the faster the temperature will increase, because the more and more trees are being cut off by Indonesia and the corporations they're facilitating. It's that simple. But as long as the Pacific Island leaders don't understand the connection about what I mentioned, colonialism, capitalism, on the biggest island in their region, they are going to lose the fight. So it's in their interest to give us a voice within every opportunity on UN level. So we can pitch, for example, the Green State vision, which is in their interest. They're the ones who will benefit the most because we can prevent a further climate crisis. But we have, we are building our momentum in the African Union. We got 2 ambassadors appointed to accelerate the lobby for the United Liberation Movement for West Papua. So we hope that as soon as the COVID restrictions will, downsize, we can increase our ULMWP lobby in the African Union, such as we have in the Pacific Island Forum now, that West Papua is on the top 3 agenda. So we are making steps, but we can't, we haven't that facilitation that, for example, the great Australia is supporting the ULMWP, for example, that will accelerate the process, such as East Timor got independence, that the Australian people were behind them, that the Portugal government supported them. The Netherlands government isn't doing that. So these are the dynamics that, we don't have. But if we have those dynamics, we can have a fast print and we can write history tomorrow. We are confident about that because that's what the Green State vision is. It's a vision for the world to prevent the climate crisis. But we must need courageous countries who have the funds and who can facilitate us. And then we can write, a climate revolution. I'm confident about that. Thank you.
I don't know how you're going for time, Raki, but we might have time for 1 or 2 more questions if anyone has one. I'll just see. We'll just wait a moment to see, but maybe one final one, just a personal one, Raki. In terms of your time, obviously the activism outside of West Papua is very hard work, as you've said. So, could you just tell us a little bit about what you spend your time doing in terms of your activist life?
Yeah, it's sometimes really exhausted, to be honest, because I'm, besides being a father of 5 kids, I work as civil servant in the Netherlands full time, so 40-hour shift a week. And then besides that, the hours I've left, I'm the spokesperson, international spokesperson of Free West Papua campaign with all these different heads, supporting the ULMWP, supporting Free West Papua campaign chapters. So it's like having 5 full-time jobs, right? That's basically my work shift. But so you make sacrifices. That's what you do as revolutionary, as long as the Dutch government doesn't take their moral responsibility to facilitate us. So we are on a daily basis. I try to be a journalist. I try to be a history teacher. I try to be a politician. And that's the life of an activist, an all-round activist, as I mentioned before. Is it paying off? Absolutely. Because we became, when I go to universities, this pandemic year was a top year for our campaign. I gave more than 20, guest lectures online. So the interesting part of COVID is a lot of, happening events were online, so I can have 3 on a day without traveling. So, the story could go very fast. So that's what we did last year. And the momentum in the Netherlands is increasing. So we've break the deadly silence. We got a lot of university students supporting us. We got the entire climate change movement in the Netherlands, talking about West Papua as showcase, demanding indigenous rights to their political representatives. So change is possible. And if what I'm telling them, I'm not an academic yet, but I've created so much momentum in the Netherlands by just telling this powerful story. And this is not my powerful story. It is yours as well, because it's your former colony. How is it possible that Dutch history teachers are not aware about what is happening in their former colony? That's strange, right? And so the students became teachers when they heard about the story. So I'm giving them, I weaponize them, tools to be the storyteller. And together, us telling stories, the system will change. Because teachers are like, yeah, how is this possible that I don't know about my own history? That's strange, right? And this uneasiness is our power. This is our power. We are becoming journalists. We are, confronting the journalists. How can you talking about peace and justice with, missions in Afghanistan and Mali, and at the same time looking away from a genocide in your former colony. That doesn't make sense. So we're confronting them with their credibility, and we do that with the politicians. They cannot talk about Afghanistan and Mali as well, while at the same time looking away from a genocide in their former colony. So this uneasiness must be a common good. And that's where this dynamic and momentum is building. And that gives me a lot of energy, because 10 years from now, I thought, is change, possible. And what we see now is an immense momentum of support and awareness. And in West Papua as well. So, seeing our brothers and sisters there, taking the risk to be put in prison or even being killed. How can I sit still in the Netherlands when they're sacrificing and putting their life at stake? And all I have to do is tell a story in front of the class students. So that, the risks are very different, but the sacrifices of making time, yes, you have to, I can choose sit on the bank, playing with my children, but understanding, how my father has been assassinated and more than 500,000 indigenous Papuans and more to be victim. I can't sit still. And that's the drive in me. And together with me, our comrades within Free West Papua campaign and those in West Papua, we are feeding each other. And what I'm showing here in the Netherlands is that if you see what we've realized with Free West Papua campaign and ULMWP, is that without freedom, with very little resources, we have created so much momentum in West Papua, putting West Papua on the top 3 of the Pacific Island Forum, now having more than 80 plus countries demanding a United Nations Human Rights Fact-Finding mission without money and support of one big country. Imagine if in Australia or just the Netherlands, taking their more responsibility to support the ULMWP, we would write history tomorrow. It's that simple. So this is the confidence that I give to individuals, that you have a lot of power, and together we're gonna create that change. I hope I've answered your questions. It's a long answer.
Yeah, fantastic answer. Thank you very much. Yeah. There's a couple of questions there. I don't know if you want to choose one or address them both quickly, but one is about Indigenous representation at the next COP, and also a question about why the Dutch government is not supportive.
Yes, so to start, thank you. To start with the first one regarding Indigenous representation in the COP, yes, I met a lot of Indigenous groups and leaders, and the story is basically the same. They were excluded from most of the talks and the decision, as happened the last all the COPs before. That's why we have this mess of the climate and biodiversity crisis, because their voices were downsized and not equal as those who are in power. That's why this destruction can continue. It's very simple. So the climate crisis, what I reverse it, if indigenous peoples were in power, we didn't have this climate crisis. That's what the numbers are saying. So it's about power sharing. Those who have contributed the less, such as the small island states and the global south, should have a bigger voice. But because they are being confronted the most at this moment by this rising sea and all these conflicts in the global south. But it's not happening. We've seen it in the COP26. So what's the way forward? And within the climate justice strategy system, with all these grassroots and indigenous peoples, the outcome was very clear. How are we going to respond to the official outcome of this world leader? That's basically the challenge. Because they are still in power. The biggest delegation at COP26 were those of fossil fuel corporations, the lobbyists. And so the games haven't changed. So the challenge stays the same. How are we going to prepare and weaponize ourselves against this outcome and those who are in power? And the conclusion is that we have to find a way to educate the people in the global north, in the green institutions, how we going to basically bring in this perspective, which I've been educating for the last 1 hour, to understand the role of indigenous peoples, the key role they are playing, and make as much as allies as possible to create a system change within the global north institutions and societies. That's the way forward. And that's the energy is what I felt. I got a lot of optimism because of this grassroots and individuals and NGOs who are willing to create a change, who understand that indigenous peoples play an important role. And we see that, the indigenous leaders are taking their own decisions right now. saying we wanted to save Amazon, and we know what the solution will be. So they've kind of their own green state vision. So that's really interesting to see how indigenous leaders are taking the lead themselves. You can see that in Canada, in the US with the Dakota Access Pipeline. So indigenous peoples are not only victims, but they're showing a way out. And the people in the global north and the green, the climate change activists and NGOs, they must acknowledge that and support it. And together we can create that momentum and play out these fossil fuel corporations and the destructive industries and the governments who are supporting them. That's the way forward. So that's the answer on the question 1. And the question 2 is like, you say that the Dutch government is not supportive. Is it a party issue? What about the Dutch royals? Yeah, so the Dutch royals, let me start with that one. We saw His Excellency King Willem-Alexander did a state visit to Indonesia and in, I think, 2020 or begin this year. And he apologized to the Indonesian government for the Dutch violence in the colonial history. So that's the attitude of the royal family, not mentioning about the genocide Indonesia is committing now, but apologize for the violence at the time because he brought a huge trade delegation with him. All Dutch corporations were eager to make new agreements for profit, right? So the intentions are clear. It's about economic benefits for the Dutch government and also using the Dutch king in facilitating this. But we have some political parties in the Dutch parliament who are supportive, but not that supportive that they have basically having one debate in the last 60 years. So that's the challenge here. How is it possible that I have heard so much debates about the war in Afghanistan and Syria and so forth, which is good. But how is it possible that the Dutch politicians haven't put one debate about West Papua in the Dutch parliament? So that's our agenda. We'll go building the momentum that we're going to use all the students and activists to force the politicians to have the credibility on whatever human rights issue by pointing out what is happening in West Papua. So that's on the agenda. So it's a constant process for us to keep up the momentum high and the mainstream media to focus on West Papua and institutions. So that's a constant challenge. Yeah, I hope I've answered the questions, both questions now.
Yes, very, very much so. So thank you very much for sharing all of that today, Raki. So apologies again for the technical delays, but I'm really glad that we got a chance to hear from you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you all so much as well for having me.
All right. To everyone on Zoom,